This session is on asking the right questions. So, as you're teaching a class and going into the classroom and trying to get students to engage in the content, it could be helpful to step back and think about the types of questions that you're asking and if they are leading or enabling you to start those discussions and get students involved in the discussion that's occurring during class. Today we'll focus on provoking questions, types of questions, and then tips for how to design or ask questions in your classes. To start off, it's important to think about provoking questions. Why do they matter? Why do we need to think about a provoking question? Well, first of all, different types of questions can really keep up the engagement of the students. They can promote critical thinking depending on the types of questions that you're asking. They can impact the timing, the sequence, the understanding, the comprehension of the content that's being discussed in the class. And it can really encourage students to interact with the content to better understand what's being covered in the class. We use these types of questions to understand other perspectives, to think about other ways of, of thinking or processes of thinking, and we can use them in collaborative work with thinking and learning. And finally, identifying the function of a question is crucial in motivating students because it helps us drive the conversation when we ask different types of questions demanding different types of answers. For this, to think about the types of questions, it's essential to ask questions for communication. We're always asking for clarifications or asking for more information in our regular conversations, and in the classroom it can look the same. And for this, we can look at these little breakdowns here as teacher to students, or student to student. You can also have students to students. And by incorporating these different interaction patterns of a teacher to a student, or teacher to the class asking questions, or students asking questions to one another, it really encourages students to build understanding and awareness of their learning process. It can help promote that high level thinking. It helps to draw out what students are thinking or what others are thinking. And good questions can really promote that student-centered teaching or that student-centered classroom. When students are driving the questions, they're asking for what their needs are, and they're really following up to deeply understand where they might have some areas that they don't understand as much. For the next couple of slides, we're going to look at different examples of questions. And as I read them out, I would like you to just go ahead and think about what your answer would be for each of these. Is it a short answer? Is it a long answer? Does it make you want to keep going? Or does it kind of have a natural stopping point at one side or another, or one point or another? And you might want to take off your professor hat for a minute and think about what it would be like if you were in a class, or if for your students, would they naturally ask or keep going based on this specific type of question that's being asked? So the first one is, do you ask questions during class? Think about what your answer would be. The next one here is, what do you think about students asking questions in class, or asking questions to students in class? What types of questions do you typically ask at the beginning, the middle, the end of class? So what kind of answer um, would you reply with? These questions are good examples, aren't they? What are the advantages of asking provoking questions? Why do we ask questions in class? Now I want to think about the types of questions that were asked. Each one of those had a couple different options, and we're going to take some time over the next slides to look at those. But Typically, we can break down questions into different types of questions. And here you can see the different types with closed. These types of questions typically invite a one-word answer, yes, no. There's not much after that. And some students might naturally continue to talk, but that type of question is considered a closed question when it just has yes or no answer. A funnel question can begin broadly and then narrow to a specific point, or it could go from a specific point to start opening to be more broad. And the next type is a probing question. So this type is useful for gaining clarification or getting others to tell you more information about something that you're asking. An open question requires a little more thought and generally encourage wider responses, types of responses. These ones are the opposite of closed. They cannot be answered with just a yes, no. They're very open-ended there. A recall and process question. This typically requires recipients to remember a fact, and it could be used as a review at the beginning of class with the previous content that was taught, or possibly as you're going on and doing some formative checks throughout the class. And then leading questions are designed to lead the respondent towards a certain desired positive or negative route. And sometimes we do tend to use some of these types of leading questions where we might guide students to say something in a little different way than they would if it was a completely open or probing type of question. So you might want to take a picture of this or come back to this screen as we go forward to the next screen. Because here, go ahead and stop the recording and enter in what you think these types of questions are. So you don't need to respond to these. It's just, are they open? Are they probing? Are they leading? What types are these? Here are some of the more common or likely answers for those, and you might have had something a little different. There are a lot of areas that overlap, but typically you'll see that you have some that are open and some that are closed. You can definitely see the leading question here with these questions are good examples, aren't they? You can see some examples of the probing, one of the recall and process. And again, some of these could have been recall and process depending on where they are in your lesson. But the overall idea here is that there are lots of different types of questions that can be asked. And we could look at our own question habits and see, what are we asking our students? What types do we tend to hang on to and use as we ask our questions going throughout the class? Tying in with Bloom's taxonomy about thinking the lower and higher order thinking skills, we can see some question stems here. If we are just looking to look at the recall of information or factual recall, here are some question stems that could be used for this type. And these correspond with these abilities here, these skills of to be able to demonstrate your learning, like list or define or tell. When we get into that comprehension or understanding stage, here are some others where we're trying to see if students are able to describe or extend their ideas or discuss. And you can see that these questions build it up a little bit more. Can you list the sequence? What happens after? So it might not be that memorization anymore. It's taking it a little deeper. It's extending that knowledge or demonstrating that students can extend on that or apply it to a different situation. With the third level of application, we're going even deeper. And here, this is where we're trying to get them to go deeper than just listing a sequence and showing their knowledge through that or just explaining, but now they're demonstrating something or they're relating it or they're examining it. And you can see that the question stems here get a little more in depth. So how could this have happened in this situation? What factors would you change? So they're able to demonstrate a little bit more knowledge of what they've learned based on how this question is answered. Then we get to the analysis section. And again, this is where we want them to be able to analyze, arrange, compare, contrast, explain at a deeper level. And then here you can see those different types of question stems. And with the other three here, we have synthesis, evaluation, and creativity. And again, you can see as the types or as these different levels of Bloom's taxonomy are addressed, you can see the corresponding stems, the question stems that come, and how these questions are all a little different. And so this might be something that you look at. Are you asking your students to recall some information, or are you asking them to do something deeper with it? Are you asking them to assess the information? Are you asking them to judge it or respond to or imagine a new way of doing something? And that's why some of these different question stems are important, because they add that variety, and they can also help us to effectively build up the knowledge or check on the knowledge that's being built and get students answering in a deeper level by maybe starting at one of the lower levels and skipping ahead and building up to like the third level and then the fifth level, and being able to see how students are able to respond at those different levels. So here are just a couple other stems that you could see, and they're nice, easy questions because we can take these and just put them into class. And sometimes it's very helpful to prepare some of these ahead of time, because when we're teaching in the moment, of course, we tend to ask questions, but it's much harder to plan out our questions that we're going to ask and make sure that we're asking a variety and the right ones in the moment. You can also encourage student-led questions. And so flipping this expectation of, oh, the professor needs to answer every single question, or to ask every single question, and students answer every single question, we can switch it around and get those students to ask questions to their peers, to their teacher, to everyone in the class. And so thinking about changing from what questions do you have, or do you have any questions, or sorry, do you have any questions, or do you understand everything? Usually we ask that, do you have any questions? But maybe now you can flip it, what kinds of questions do you have? And that puts the ball in the students' court, where they now need to ask their questions and check that they understand through their questions. A couple tips for asking and planning. You can have questions written on the slides to make sure that everyone comprehends the question. This can really help when you're working with students, especially if you're working with different types of students, different learning styles, different um, levels um, of education, different first languages or language background, and it gets everyone on the same page where they know what's being asked, they can read it, they can look at it, and they don't have to think to figure out if you're asking the question to one individual, they're not looking for other hints, especially when it's online right now, as we're all online. It can be helpful to put the question out there, make sure that everyone's following and knows they can take a minute to comprehend the question. Some of our students are visual learners, or some of them need to see it and hear it to kind of solidify what's being asked, or have the confidence to answer because they know what was asked. They don't have to ask to, can you repeat it, or something like that. And then you can ask after a couple seconds, does everyone understand the question? I'm going to give you a few more minutes to come up with an answer. And so after, you can give them that time to think, and then students can really add to that, add their thoughts, add their ideas, and answer those questions probably in a more robust way than if we didn't give them time or did not put it out there. And of course, every class is different. But if you are struggling with students not responding to questions or not really giving you the answers you want, this could be a good time or a good strategy to try for your class to see if it does make any changes or lead to any changes in your class. So as we end here, what types of questions do you want to ask more of? That's the question. Look at what you currently ask in your class. Are you putting them on the slides? What types are you asking? Are you asking probing? Are you asking closed questions? How can you add more variety through those question types and hopefully increase the discussion that's taking place? So please think about that and thank you for listening. Have a great day.